Hello everyone and welcome. Today we're going to draw a rose, and it's been a while, so bear with me as I'm trying to figure out how to film videos again. I had to take a break because of a back injury, so I'm glad that I'm back. For this rose, I used a photo reference that I found on Unsplash, which I'll link down below for you to use as well. And first things, as always, I'm using a basic pencil just to carve out basic shapes. So I'm using anything, any circles or lines to define where I would like the stem to be, and also 3 circles to define the basic shape of a rose, the base of it, and then the edges of the petals that are going out. Once I'm done with that, I'm using the same pencil to carve out the petal placement, and in here I'm looking at the photo reference closely to see how they're overlapping or how they're positioned. So using again rough shapes to define those. Once I'm happy with that, and it took a couple of times to try this out, to be quite honest, roses are a bit difficult for me to draw. They're so buttery, and whenever I'm trying to use a pencil or an ink pen, fine liner, any sort of that, it's always difficult to see how I can replicate that butteriness, and it's always much rougher than I would like them to be. So in here I'm using a mechanical pencil to define the petals in more detail. With a pen, I just started with the rough shapes just to see how they're looking like, and once I'm happy with the result, I erased them a bit just to have that outline loosely placed on the paper and going in with a bit more detail with a mechanical pencil to add any details where I'm seeing that the roses are bent or a bit broken or wavy, so that I can see them in the final piece. And in here, I do suggest that you look at the photo reference and see, for example, the base of the petal and then the edges. They're always a bit more wavier than the base of it. So you can always add some of the zigzag lines and some of the waves to it to see and add some more additional dimension. And once I'm happy with the details in there, I'm adding everything from the stem and the leaves, and again using that same photo reference to define the placement of every single detail in here. And once I'm happy with that, I'm trying to figure out the shading of this flower. It's a bit trickier since it's so buttery and smooth, to see how you can add the details. I'm starting with a pencil first just to get a feel of how that can look like before I add inks, since I haven't done any warming up prior to this, and to be quite honest, I haven't drawn in months since my back injury and I had to press pause on everything. And here I'm using a pencil to see and get a feel of how drawing looks like again and how it feels like again before I add more details to it. Whenever I feel more confident and I'm seeing that it's really dark and that magenta color on the edges, I'm pressing hard with a pencil to add the details in there. And whenever I'm seeing a bit less of that color, going towards that white parts of the center of the petals, I'm just loosely defining them with a pencil. And once I'm happy with how that looks like and I'm getting some confidence back in, I'm using an ink pen, a fine liner in this case, to outline the petals and the entire flower. And in here, I'm just following everything that I've drawn in pencil and adding more details whenever I see that they're fit, looking closely at the photo reference to define every piece of the petal. Sometimes I'm taking a look and seeing if I can add any additional overlap, since that also adds a bit more dimension to the flower, and also any parts when I'm seeing that the petal is not as perfect, so that I can add some of the additional waviness to it. This is definitely up to your preference. Once you do a outline, you can stop and have an outline minimal piece. If you would like to add some more shading and take a stab at using inks, you can start shading in the petals. First, again, to get a feel of how it can look like, I'm using a pencil to define the shading placement and where it would look best, since once I use inks, there's no going back. And firstly, taking that butteriness of a flower and trying to replicate that with ink, a black ink. And also any part of the greenery, it's much simpler to draw, in my opinion. You can just go ahead and define the details as much as you would like to. But first, again, shading in the details with a pencil is always the best path. If you're not sure how it can look like, you can always start with a pencil, see how you feel about it. If you like to erase it or add some color to it, you can do that as well. But first, I'm in here trying to define any parts that I'm seeing that are pink. I'm using a pencil to define those and add some sort of a shading back into this drawing, covering anything that is darker, but trying at the very center where all of the petals are blossoming, trying not to overdo that, because once you do more shading with inks, it can be a bit overdone and you will lose a lot of details. So be careful around that part. Try to add some shading, but not cover the entire petals in either a pencil or an ink, because it will be much difficult to define every petal for that matter. Here, I'm starting to outline a bit more of those first two petals that I'm seeing at the very base of the flower. They're on the left and the right side, and trying to add some of the shading into the center of that middle petal at the very base of the flower. And in here, I'm going very loosely with 0.1 fine liner to define those shapes and to define shadings that I'm finding in the photo reference. Maybe you can go freely and shade in pieces that you see that would look best. But I try to look at the photo reference, and even though it's so tricky, I try to replicate what I see and start always with the edges of the petal, the base of it as well, and then the edges on the very top where the top of the petal is and comes out of the flower. So with that, trying very carefully to ink as much as I can without losing a lot of details. Trying to add a bit of a life to this piece so it's not very simple, but again, has some of the details that I would like to cover pretty much in the style that I always use. So in here, the trickiest part is that central part of the rose, and only adding a couple of shading here and there whenever I see that it could be worth having it. But again, you will see that I'm erasing some parts in pencil whenever I saw that it's a bit too much and too dark, and it can definitely lose some of the details. So try to add as much as you can without losing the central part in a black ink. Once I'm happy with how that looks like, I will go in and ink the greenery. This part is much simpler. Whenever I see something that is darker, I'm going full in with black ink and inking that part and adding some details from the very edges towards the center, thinking about how it would look like in 3D and replicate that. With the base, I'm going carefully to add that one leaf that it has and also additional pieces that I'm seeing and shading them in a bit loosely. When I go and shade in the leaf, I'm doing a standard shading that I always do, coming from the very edge of the leaf towards the center, leaving that middle part without any ink and going from the center vein towards the edges so that I can add some more dimension to the leaf itself, so it's not that plain compared to the details that I added with the rose. And with that, once I'm happy with how that looks like, I will stop to make sure that I don't add too much of the details, and that whenever I see that some veins are lost, that leaf shape, I'm adding more ink to define them a bit further. And whenever I see that some bits of the central part of the flower are missing some details, which is up to debate because I think at the end I overdid it, but let me know in the comments what you think. I added some more details again to the flower that's already inked and refining things that I think would look good. And that's pretty much it. I hope you found this video useful, and as always, feel free to let me know what you would like to see next. I'm feeling a bit better finally, and I can start filming again, so I will see how I can manage a normal upload schedule. I can't promise weekly, but I'll try to do them monthly, so I will see you in my next video. Thank you for watching, and subscribe if you haven't. I see ya! Bye!